Hi friends, do you know what H.G. Wells said about war? If we do not end wars, the war will end us. There's a song, War, What Is It Good For? By Edwin Starr. You should hear it sometime. I can't show it to you right here because there are some copyright issues. Just search it and listen to the song. It's a very beautiful song. Today, we are about to discuss something very closely related to war and its effects in our ordinary life. The story we are here to discuss today is about an ordinary man who's so much fascinated with the life of a luxurious man. One day, he finds a roll-top desk, which was a fascination for him for some long time. In a junk shop, he finds it in a junk shop, and he buys it because it was cheap. It needed to be repaired. He buys it and he takes it home. He believes that he can repair it, mend it, and bring it back to in a good shape. After taking that roll-top desk to his home, when he is trying to repair it, he finds something peculiar in one of the drawers. He finds a small box, and what he finds inside that small box is very important. Let's get to the text and see what he finds in it, shall we? So I want you to pause this video for now and take your textbook and go to the first part of the text, the best Christmas present in the world. Read the first part carefully, read it carefully, and let's get to the discussion. Pause the video for now. I spotted it in a junk shop in Bridport, a roll-top desk. The man said it was early 19th century, an oak. I had wanted one, but they were too far expensive. This one was in a bad condition. The roll-top in several pieces, one leg clumsily mended, scorch marks all down one side. It was going for a very little money. I thought I could restore it. It would be a risk, a challenge, but I had to have it. I paid the man and brought it back to my workroom at the back of my garage. I began work on it on Christmas Eve. So, the story starts with an I. The narration starts with an I. So that means the one who is speaking himself is a character in the story. I would like to say the central protagonist of the story. Who's the main character, let's say. So he spotted it in a junk shop. He spotted this, what? A roll-top desk in a junk shop. What does the word spotted means? Simply this word spot means to find something. Have you heard of the word spotter? See here. See this, can you see a sniper? And there's a guy right next to him. See, that's a guy who uses his gadgets and calculates the distance of the object to be shot. He is called a spotter. Okay, so in this case, spotting means finding, simply finding. He found it in a junk shop in Bridport. It was a roll-top desk. The seller said that it was from the 19th century. At those days, these roll-top desks were far too luxurious and expensive, but this one was damaged and it was on cheap. So he decided to buy it, believing that he can repair it by himself. So he bought it and took it home with him. So as for this roll-top desk, I hope you have seen this roll-top desk in films and cartoons. Okay, this roll-top desk, not this one, the real one, what he saw in his shop, the junk shop, it was actually in a bad condition. Scorch marks were all over the place. Do you know what a scorch mark is? No, that's too much. Not that one. Okay. Yeah, this will do. Scorch mark means burn marks. Okay. Burn marks were all over the roll-top desk. The roll-top was in several pieces. The one leg was carelessly mended. It had to be repaired. So he decides to take it home and repair on the Christmas Eve. I removed the roll-top completely and pulled out the drawers. The veneer had lifted almost everywhere. It looked like the water damage to me. Both fire and water had clearly taken their tolls on this desk. The last drawer was stuck fast. I tried all I could ease it out gently. So he took the roll-top desk to his garage, started repairing it. As I've told you before, there were scorch marks and the veneer. What's a veneer? Do you know what a veneer is? I'm sure you have seen a veneer. See the picture? Veneer is the false wood, a false covering that you put or paste or nail over a cheap wood to look like it's expensive. Okay. So as for this roll-top desk, the veneer had come up in many places. It looked like a water damage to him. So there were fire damage, now water damage. It was completely out of use. So still he believed that he can repair it. So he took it home to repair. Let's see what he is going to do. One of the drawers were stuck fast. Okay. Since you have read the story, you know that one of the drawers were too tight and he had to use a very brutal force with his hand to open it. And when it opened, it revealed a shallow space underneath and a secret drawer. And in that secret drawer, there was a black box, a small black box within it. What would that be? Let's see. I reached in and took out a small tin box, a black box. Cello-taped on top, it was a piece of lined notepaper, and it was written, Jim's last letter, received January 25, 1915. To be buried with me when the time comes. So there's something curious about it, right? Why a letter, something in a box, and it is written that this should be buried with me. Whoever wrote that, it should be buried with me when the time comes. And it was this letter, we got the introduction that it contains a letter written by a Jim, a Jim, on January 25, received on January 25, 1915. See, there's another note. See, there's a curiosity within us too right now. Along with the narrator, we are still curious of what the letter, that box is about. I knew as I did it that it was wrong for me to open the box, but curiosity got the better my scruples. See, scruples stands for your hesitation, our hesitation not to do something, okay, but curiosity. See, he bought this table, this roll-top desk from a junk shop, and he finds something curious, a letter inside it in a secret chamber. So he cannot help his curiosity, so he decides to open the box. Let's see what he's going to find in that box. Inside that box, there was an envelope. The address read, Mrs. Jim McPherson, 12 Copper Beaches, Bridport, Dorset. I took out the letter and unfolded it. It was written in pencil and dated on the top, December 26, 1914. So the letter inside the box, it was written on December 26, 1914, and it was received for this particular person, whoever that the owner of that roll-top desk was. It was received on January 25, 1915. Does these 2 years ring any bell for you? 1914, 1915? Let me make it a little bit more clear. How about 1914 till 1918? Yes, the First World War. The letter was written in pencil, and the top note on the black box, it was written in a shaky handwriting. Do you think it has some significance in the story? Let's see. The second part of the text is actually a peek into the letter. We both know that it's not right to seek into someone's privacy, to crawl into someone's personal life, letter or diary. But here, we are forced to do so. Not just us, the narrator too. We are forced to look into that letter. So we should know what the story is going to lead us to, right? So let's look at the text. Look at the letter. Pause the video for now, read the letter, and look for yourself what the letter is about. So the letter starts with the salutation addressing, "Dearest Connie, dearest Connie, I write to you in a much happier frame of mind because something wonderful just happened that I must tell you at once. We were standing to our trenches yesterday morning, Christmas morning. It was crisp and quiet all about. A beautiful morning as I have ever seen, as cold and frosty as a Christmas morning should be." So, from the addressing, let's say the one who wrote the letter wrote this letter to someone so much dear to him. Dearest Connie, a female name, maybe his wife or sister, we don't know for now. So he's talking about a wartime. See, he says they were all standing in their trenches, in their positions, taking in their position. Do you know what a trench is? You just saw a picture of a trench a few minutes ago. I'll show it you again. See, this is a trench. The dug trenches. They dug trenches during war to escape from the shots and the bomb drops. So they were in their trenches taking their positions at some day, and something wonderful happened. As the introduction to the letter, the narrator is saying something wonderful happened that day. What would that be? I should like able to tell you that we began it, but the truth, I'm ashamed to say, that the Fritz began it. Something that happened, it was started by the Fritz. And there's a reference to the name Tommy in the textbook. See the word Fritz and Tommy. Have you ever heard those words? The word Fritz actually stands for, it's a nickname for the name Frederick, a German name, and Tommy for Thomas, the British name. Okay, so the Fritz, the common name Fritz, was actually used to represent the German soldiers during the First and the Second World War by the Allied forces, and the Tommy to represent the British soldiers. So the letter says, the one who wrote the letter, he describes that he would like to say that we began it, but it was actually the Fritz, the German soldiers, who began it. What did they begin actually? First, someone saw a white flag waving from the trenches opposite. So we should be able to understand that this man who's writing the story is British, and that's what we are about to discuss started in the German side. Okay, somebody from the opposite trench waved a white flag, then called out, "Happy Christmas, Tommy! Happy Christmas!" When we had got over the surprise, some of us shouted back. So there was a cheer from the German side saying, "Happy Christmas," and some of us, British soldiers, shouted back, "Happy Christmas to you, Fritz, same to you." I thought that would be it. The narrator, the one who is writing the letter, says, "I thought this is it." But what happened was that suddenly one of them was up there in his grey greatcoat and waving a white flag. "Don't shoot, lads," someone shouted, and no one did. Then there was another Fritz, and there was another. The German soldiers were coming out of the trench. They came out from the trench, jumped on the parapet. Parapet is a elevated position out from the trench. They jumped over the parapet and they started walking towards the British soldiers with a white flag. They were shouting, "Don't shoot, don't shoot." And nobody shot. Nobody made a move. The one who's writing the letter, he shouted, "Keep your heads down, it's a trick. It's the trick from the German soldiers." But it wasn't. One of the Germans was waving a bottle above his head. "It's Christmas Day, Tommy. We have a schnapps. We have a sausage. We meet you, yes." By this time, there were dozens of them walking towards us across no man's land and not a rifle between them. So, these German soldiers, as I told you before, they jumped out of their trenches and they were walking towards the British army through the no man's land. No man's land? It's a war zone. It's a war front where, and the land owned by no army. Okay, that's why it's called a no man's land. The land where the war is going on and it is owned by no country. Okay, they were walking towards the British soldiers through this no man's land and with schnapps. You know what schnapps? Okay, no. We are not showing the picture of schnapps. It's an alcoholic drink, so we're not showing it. So they had schnapps and sausages. Okay, sausages. You can see sausages here. So they had schnapps, they had sausages, and they were shouting out with peace and joy. So these German soldiers, as you have seen, they were walking towards the British soldiers with schnapps, sausages, and merry. First, everyone hesitated in between the British army, but it was the little Private Morris who jumped up at first among the British soldiers. He shouted, "Come on, boys, what are we waiting for?" Then there was no stopping them. I was the officer. I should have stopped them there and then, I suppose. But the truth is that it never occurred to me that I should. All along their line and ours, I could see men walking slowly towards one another, grey coats, khaki coats, meeting in the middle, and I was one of them. I was part of this. In the middle of the war, we were making peace. As we discussed in the beginning, the event is going on during the World War, the First World War. Now, what we are observing, what we are seeing is the war front between the German and the British army. The war was going on at a tremendous rate, and on the Christmas Eve, they were making peace there. The Germans started it. They came up with a white flag, then sausages, then schnapps, and the British soldiers joined them. And in between the war, see, the line is very important. In the middle of the war, we were making peace. You cannot imagine, dearest Connie, my feelings as I looked into the eyes of the Fritz officer who approached me, hands outstretched. Hans Wolf. He introduces himself. Hans Wolf. I am from Düsseldorf. I play cello in the orchestra. Happy Christmas. So the German officer, he approached the British officer who is writing this letter, Jim McPherson. I would like to introduce him to you now, Jim McPherson. He introduces himself, Hans Wolf. I am actually from Düsseldorf. I play cello. He's a cello player. You have seen cello, right? A bigger version of a violin. So, Captain Jim McPherson, I replied, and happy Christmas to you too. I'm a school teacher from Dorset in the west of England. Did you notice one thing? Jim McPherson here, he was a school teacher. And Hans Wolf, on the other hand, he was a cello player, a musician. How do you think they end up as army officers during this war? See, this is the war times, right? Almost every citizen in a country with a good physique was appointed as army person. They were forced to fight for their country because it's about surviving. So civilians also had to participate in war. And just like Jim McPherson, Hans Wolff also ended up as an army official. Let's see what's going to happen between these two people. As Jim McPherson introduced himself, when he says he's from Dorset, west of England, Hans Wolff says, "Ah, Dorset," he smiled. "I know this place, I know it very well. We shared my rum ration and his excellent sausage, and we talked, Connie." How we talked. He spoke almost perfect English, but it turned out that he had never set foot on Dorset, never even been to England. He had learned all he knew from school. His favorite writer was Thomas Hardy. This Hans Wolff, this man, this German official, this army officer, he never been to England. But as per Jim McPherson, he says he spoke perfect English. He learned that from school, he says. And the story also mentioned a novel from Thomas Hardy, Far from the Madding Crowd. Along with Jim McPherson, Hans Wolff, they discussed about the novel Far from Madding Crowds, the characters in the novel. It is mentioned in your textbook, how they talked about Bathsheba, Gabriel Oak and Sergeant Troy. And along with this time, imagine you have to understand one thing. This is the war time, okay? It's 1914 and the war is going on, and in between the war, this German officer, the head of the German army, German troops and the British troops head here, Jim McPherson, they are talking in middle of the war, in no man's land. All these things, all these events points only to one thing, okay? This enmity is actually between political ideologies. As I looked about me, there were huddles of khaki and grey coats everywhere, all over no man's land, smoking, laughing, talking, drinking, eating. Hans Wolff and I shared what was left of your wonderful Christmas cake. He thought the marzipan was the best he had ever tasted. I agreed. We agreed about almost everything. And he was my enemy. There never was a Christmas party like it, Connie. We almost agreed in everything, he says. As I told you before, even though they were enemies, they had their own personal life and ideologies. The war was between nations and their political needs, political philosophies, not between soldiers. And when this party was continuing, somebody brought a football to this no man's land. They were enjoying their party, Christmas party, and in between the party, they started playing football. The grey coats, the khaki coats, they started playing together in no man's land, war zone, war front. A few hours ago, they were shooting each other. They were trying to kill each other. Now, they are playing football. And at the end of the game, the Germans won for the goals 2-1. And there was a conversation between Jim McPherson and Hans Wolff. And in that they says, I think, it's Hans Wolff who's saying, I think this is how we should resolve this war. A football match. No one dies in a football match. No children are orphaned. No wives become widows. It's the opinion from Hans Wolff, a German soldier, German official actually. He says that this is how we have to resolve our problems, the problems between countries, through some silly games, a football match. And Jim McPherson says, no, not football, let's play cricket, in which there is more possibility for us to win. They share this funny moment and they all laugh together. And the time came, and all too soon, when the game was finished, the schnapps and the rum and the sausage had long since run out, and we knew it was all over. I wished Hans well and told him that I hoped he would see his family again soon, that the fighting would end and we all go home. See, there's another important statement coming. I think this is what every soldier wants on both sides. Hansford says, "Take care, Jim McPherson. I shall never forget this moment, nor you." He saluted and walked away from me slowly, unwillingly, I felt. He turned to wave just once, then drifted back to the trenches and became one of the grey coats and went back to his trench. And that night, after the game, after the celebrations, in both the trenches, the German and the British soldiers, they sang Christmas carol songs. They shared their songs. In your textbook, there's a few carol songs are mentioned. The Germans sang "Stille Nacht," the silent night. Our boys sang "While Shepherds Watched." We exchanged the carols for a while and then we felt silent. We had our time of peace and goodwill, a time I will treasure as long as I live. Dearest Connie, the letter is now coming to an end. Dearest Connie, by Christmas next time year, this war will be nothing but a distant and terrible memory. I know from all that happened today how much both armies long for peace. We shall be together again soon, I am sure of it. Your loving Jim. And the letter ends with a hope from Jim McPherson saying that I will see you soon. See, there are several important things that you should notice from this event between the German and the British soldiers. None of them actually wanted this war to happen. You know what happened in First World War. Thousands of people died, thousands of cities destroyed, numerous kids and wives were orphaned. Millions of lives were destroyed. All these destructions for the political policies of countries. As the narrator says, none of the soldiers, none of the army officers wanted this war to happen. Do you remember something that we discussed earlier? There was a slip over that black box written in a shaky handwriting. It said, "The last letter from Jim." To the end of the second part of the story, to the end of the letter, Jim McPherson says, "I'll see you soon." And this letter was the last letter from Jim McPherson for his wife, Connie, Mrs. Jim McPherson. Do you think Jim ever returned? What do you think? Did he die? So in the beginning of the story, do you remember there was a slip on that black box written in a shaky handwriting? And it said that this letter should be buried with me when the time comes. Why do you think Connie, Mrs. Jim McPherson, wanted this letter to be buried with her? Why do you think she kept this letter all these years? Let's see. Since our narrator of the story, he's now finished reading the letter, right? Imagine if you were the narrator, you owned that roll top desk and you found this letter. What will you do after reading this letter? You have an address here. In that letter, you have the name of the owner of that roll top desk to whom this letter was addressed. Well, the narrator knew exactly what to do. Let's see what he's going to do. Now, pause this video for now and go to the third part of your textbook. Read that part very carefully. I folded the letter again and slipped it carefully back into its envelope. I kept awake all night. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I drove to Bridport a few miles away. I asked a boy walking his dog where Copper Beaches was. House number 12 turned out to be nothing but a burned out shell. Roof gaping, the windows boarded up. I knocked at the house next door and asked if anyone knew the whereabouts of a Mrs. Jim McPherson. Oh yes, he said. The old man in his slippers. He knew her very well. A lovely old lady, about 101 years old. She was a little bit muddle-headed, the man said. Muddle-headed means confused, not in her wits. Okay. She is 101 years old, you should remember that. Okay. And when he asked, the narrator asked about the fire, the condition of the house, he said there was a fire sometime before, and it came from the candles that she used, people guess. So she used candles, she preferred candles than electricity because it was cheap. See, do you remember the condition of the roll top desk that we discussed at the first part of the text? There were scorch marks all over the place and there were water damage too. See, the firemen had got her out in time. Now she is in a nursing home in Burlington House on Dorchester Road on the other side of the town. So there was a fire in her house and there was the activity of the fire force, the firemen. They got her out at the right time. That explains the condition of the roll top desk, don't you think? There were fire damage on the desk and there were water damages too. The veneer had come up almost everywhere, right? Okay, now we have the location of Mrs. McPherson, Connie. She's in a nursing home on the other side of the town. The narrator is now heading to the next part of the town to see Connie. The narrator is now heading to Connie, to that nursing home. I found Burlington House nursing home easily enough. There were paper chains, there were decorative paper chains all over the hallway, and lighted Christmas trees stood in the corner with a lopsided angel on top. Lopsided means unbalanced, not symmetrical, with a angel, lopsided angel on the top of the Christmas tree there. And he said he was there to visit Mrs. McPherson and give her a Christmas present. And the matron there, she was really happy to see this person. And she walked this person, the narrator, to the hall. I could see through into the dining room where everyone was wearing a paper hat and singing. The matron had a hat on her too and seemed happy enough to see me. She even offered me a mince pie. A mince pie, a piece of a pie, a mince pie. Okay, she even offered me a mince pie. She walked me around through the corridor. Mrs. McPherson is not in there with others. She told me, she's rather confused today, so we thought it best if she had a good rest. She has no family, you know. No one visits. So I am sure she will be happy too. She will be too happy. She will be really happy to see you because she had no family. Nobody visits her. Saying this, the matron is taking the narrator to Connie, Mrs. Macpherson. She took me into a conservatory with wicker chairs and potted plants all around and left me. The old lady was sitting in a wheelchair, her hands folded in her lap. She had a silver white hair pinned into her wispy bun. She was gazing out at the garden. So, now for the first time, we are introduced to Mrs. Macpherson. Connie, this old lady in her hundreds, is sitting in that conservatory. Her hair is silver now in a wispy bun, and she is sitting looking at the garden quietly. "Hello," I said. She turned and looked up at me vacantly, without any feelings. Blank, complete blank. "Happy Christmas, Connie," I went on. "I found this. I think it's yours." As I was speaking, her eyes never left my face. I opened that tin box and gave it to her. That was the moment her eyes lit up with recognition and her face became suffused with a sudden glow of happiness. As soon as the narrator gave her this envelope, as he opened this box and gave her this letter, her face glowed, shined with happiness. I explained about the desk, about how I found it, but I don't think she was listening. So, after giving this letter, he kept on explaining how he found that desk in a junk shop and how he found the secret drawer and this box. But he says, I don't think she was listening. She wasn't listening at all. She said nothing, but stroked the letter tenderly with her fingertips. She kept on stroking that letter with her fingertips. Suddenly, she reached out and took my hand. She took the narrator's hand. Her eyes were filled with tears. "You told me that you would come home by Christmas, dearest," she said. "And here you are, the best Christmas present in the world. Come closer, Jim. Sit down." See, she's addressing the narrator as Jim. She believes that the person who is standing in front of her with that letter is her husband, Jim Macpherson, who never came back from the war. In her 100 years, she is so happy. Her face is glowing, shining with happiness, eyes filled with tears. I sat down beside her and she kissed my cheek. "I read your letter so often, Jim, every day. I wanted to hear your voice in my head. It always made me feel you were with me, and now you are. Now you're back. You can read it to me yourself. Would you do that for me, Jim dear? I just want to hear your voice again. I would love that so much. And then perhaps we will have some tea. I've made a nice Christmas cake, marzipan all over. I know how much you love marzipan." So there ends the story. Mrs. Macpherson, waiting for her husband for a long time. She kept his letter. As she says, she used to read the letter. Whenever she read that letter, the last letter of Jim Macpherson, she felt like he was beside her. That answers why she kept that letter with her all these years. She used to read it. And now when the narrator came with the letter to her, she thought that it was Jim himself. And she is so happy. She is so happy that her eyes are filled with tears. And she wants him to read the letter for her. so that she can feel the presence of her husband. And that's the end of the story. Read the story once again. Go through the story. Thank you.